The first night in the village, I couldn't sleep. The air was too still, the silence too deep, broken only by the occasional creak of old wood settling in my rented cottage. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, when a distant commotion drifted through the open window. At first, I thought it was a fox or maybe a stray dog, but then I heard voices, urgent, hushed, and angry. Curiosity got the better of me. I slipped out of bed, pulled on a sweater, and crept to the window, careful not to make a sound. Down the lane, a group of villagers clustered around the old well at the center of the square. Lanterns cast long, flickering shadows, making the scene look like something from another century. I recognized my landlord, Mrs. Hargrove, her face pinched with worry, and beside her, the tall, stoic figure of the village elder, Mr. Finch. In the center of the group, a man knelt, head bowed, hands bound behind his back. His name was Peter. I'd met him that afternoon, a friendly face who'd offered to help me carry my boxes. Mr. Finch's voice cut through the night, low but commanding. "You know the rules, Peter. You know what happens when they're broken." Peter's shoulders shook. "I'm sorry. I lost track of time. I didn't mean—" "Intentions don't matter," Mrs. Hargrove interrupted, her voice trembling. "The rules keep us safe." Without another word, two men hauled Peter to his feet and marched him toward the edge of the woods. The villagers watched in silence, no one daring to intervene. I pressed myself against the wall, heart pounding, as Peter's pleas faded into the darkness. The group returned, faces grim, and the square emptied as quickly as it had filled. I stayed frozen by the window, the warning echoing in my mind. The rules are never to be broken, no matter the reason. I arrived in the village just as the morning mist was lifting, sunlight spilling over the rooftops and cobblestone lanes. The place looked like something out of a storybook, neat rows of cottages with flower boxes, tidy gardens, and a little stream winding its way through the heart of town. The air smelled of damp earth and wood smoke, and for a moment, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I parked my car by the old stone bridge and stepped out, stretching my legs and breathing in the quiet. Mrs. Hargrove, my landlord, greeted me at the gate of my new cottage. She was a small woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, her smile warm but her eyes sharp. "Welcome to Willow's End," she said, shaking my hand with surprising strength. "We're glad to have you." She showed me around the cottage, pointing out the quirks of the old place, the sticky window in the kitchen, the uneven floorboards in the hall, the way the front door needed a firm push to close. "You'll get used to it," she said, her tone both reassuring and final. As we walked through the village, I met a handful of neighbors. There was Mr. Finch, the village elder, who nodded politely but didn't linger. A young couple, the Marshalls, waved from their garden but quickly returned to their weeding when Mrs. Hargrove approached. At the bakery, the woman behind the counter offered me a loaf of bread on the house, her hands trembling slightly as she wrapped it. Everywhere I went, people smiled and welcomed me, but their eyes darted away quickly, and conversations seemed to end the moment I drew near. I noticed other oddities, too. Children played in the square, but never strayed beyond a certain line of stones. Doors and shutters were closed tight, even on a warm afternoon. A man sweeping his porch paused when I passed, watching me until I turned the corner. The village was beautiful, but beneath the surface, something felt off, like a painting with a shadow you can't quite explain. As I settled into my cottage that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, and that every friendly smile had something unspoken. The next morning, Mrs. Hargrove arrived at my door with a basket of eggs and a folded piece of paper. She set the basket on the table and sat down across from me, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "There's something we need to discuss before you get too settled," she said, her voice gentle but edged with seriousness. She slid the paper across the table. "These are the village rules. I know it might seem odd, but everyone here follows them. It's for your own good." I unfolded the paper, expecting a list of local ordinances or maybe some quaint traditions. Instead, I found 6 simple sentences, each one more peculiar than the last. Never leave your home after midnight, no matter what you hear outside. If the church bell rings at dawn, do not answer it. Stay inside until the ringing stops. Do not cross the stone bridge after sunset. If you see a stranger in the village who does not speak, avoid eye contact and walk away. Always light a candle in your window on the first night of every month. Never, under any circumstances, enter the woods alone. I looked up, half expecting her to smile and tell me it was a joke. Instead, Mrs. Hargrove's expression was grave. "You must take these seriously. We all do. The rules keep us safe." I tried to hide my skepticism. Safe from what exactly? She hesitated, glancing at the window as if afraid someone might overhear. "From what's always been here. From what we can't explain. The rules aren't meant to frighten you, but to protect you. Please, promise me you'll follow them." I read the list again, trying to make sense of it. The church bell? The bridge? This all sounds a bit superstitious. Mrs. Hargrove's lips pressed into a thin line. "You're not the first to think so, but everyone who's lived here long enough learns to respect the rules. Some learn the hard way." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. I wanted to laugh it off, to reassure her that I'd play along, but something in her eyes stopped me. There was fear there, old and deep, and it made me uneasy. "All right," I said, folding the paper and tucking it into my pocket. "I promise I'll remember." She nodded, relief softening her features. "Good. That's all I ask." She stood, smoothing her skirt. "If you have questions, come find me. But don't test the rules. Not even once." As she left, I stared at the list, the words echoing in my mind. I told myself it was just a village quirk, a relic of old traditions. But as the day wore on, I found myself glancing at the clock, at the bridge, at the woods beyond my window, wondering what would happen if I didn't listen. The days that followed settled into a gentle rhythm. I unpacked boxes, arranged books on the shelves, and planted herbs in the little garden behind my cottage. The village was peaceful in a way I'd never known. No traffic, no sirens, just the soft hum of bees and the distant laughter of children. I found myself relaxing, letting the quiet seep into my bones. Each morning, I'd walk to the bakery for fresh bread, nodding to neighbors as I passed. The air was always crisp, the sky impossibly blue, and for a while, I almost forgot about the rules tucked in my pocket. But the oddities were impossible to ignore. Every evening, just before sunset, the village seemed to hold its breath. People hurried home, locking doors and drawing curtains with a precision that bordered on ritual. The children who played in the square vanished indoors at the first toll of the church bell, leaving their toys scattered on the grass. I watched as Mrs. Hargrove lit a candle in her window, her hands steady, but her eyes darting to the shadows gathering at the edge of the woods. On the first night of the month, I followed suit, placing a candle in my own window. As dusk deepened, I looked out and saw every cottage glowing with a single, flickering flame. The effect was beautiful, almost magical, but the silence that followed was heavy, as if the whole village was waiting for something to pass by unseen. I tried to ask about these customs, but the villagers always changed the subject. At the market, I mentioned the bridge to Mr. Finch, and he simply shook his head. "Best not to linger there after dark," he said, his tone final. When I asked the baker about the church bell, she dropped her gaze and busied herself with a tray of rolls. "It's just tradition," she muttered, but her hands trembled as she spoke. Despite the warmth of their greetings, I sensed a barrier I couldn't cross. Conversation stopped when I entered a room, and laughter faded to whispers. I caught people glancing at me when they thought I wasn't looking, their faces tight with worry or suspicion. The comfort of routine was always shadowed by the villagers' anxious adherence to the rules, as if any misstep might bring disaster. At night, as I lay in bed, I listened to the wind in the trees and wondered what secrets the village was keeping. The rules felt less like folklore and more like a warning, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being tested, watched, and measured by forces I didn't understand. It happened on a Thursday evening, just as the sun was slipping behind the hills and the village was settling into its nightly hush. I was returning from the market, arms full of apples and a loaf of bread, when I saw a boy, no older than 12, lingering by the stone bridge. He was skipping stones across the water, his jacket slung carelessly over one shoulder, clearly in no hurry to get home. I recognized him as Jamie, the baker's son, always quick with a grin and a wave. I hesitated, remembering the third rule: do not cross the stone bridge after sunset. The sky was already streaked with purple, the last light fading fast. I called out, "Jamie, shouldn't you be heading home?" He looked up, startled, then shrugged. "Just a few more throws. Mum's baking late tonight." His voice was casual, but I noticed the way his eyes flicked nervously toward the far side of the bridge. I waited, shifting from foot to foot, feeling the chill settle in. The village behind me was already shuttered, windows glowing with candlelight. I glanced at my watch. Sunset had come and gone. Jamie tossed one last stone, then turned to leave, but as he did, a strange sound echoed from the woods beyond the bridge. It was faint at first, like the rustle of leaves, but quickly grew into a low, guttural whisper that seemed to slither across the water. Jamie froze, his face draining of color. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, my own heart pounding. The shadows on the far bank seemed to shift, growing longer, reaching toward us. Without another word, Jamie bolted past me, sprinting up the lane toward his house. I followed, glancing back only once. In the fading light, I thought I saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees, tall, thin, and impossibly still. That night, the village felt different. The air was heavy, and the usual chorus of crickets was silent. I lay awake, listening for any sign of Jamie, but the street outside remained empty. The next morning, I stopped by the bakery, hoping to see him. The baker's eyes were red, her hands shaking as she kneaded dough. When I asked about Jamie, she forced a smile. "He's not feeling well, just a bit of a cold." But her voice was brittle, and she wouldn't meet my gaze. As I left, I noticed a new candle burning in their window, brighter than the rest, its flame flickering wildly. The villagers went about their routines, but there was a tension in the air, a sense that something had shifted. I couldn't shake the feeling that Jamie's small act of defiance had been noticed, and that the village was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. A few days after Jamie's disappearance, I met Clara at the post office. She was new to the village too, having moved in just a month before me. We struck up a conversation while waiting in line, and soon found ourselves walking together through the quiet lanes, both of us grateful for company that didn't come with wary glances or clipped words. Clara was sharp, quick-witted, and refreshingly blunt. Over coffee in her sunlit kitchen, she confided that she found the village's rules as strange as I did. It's like living in a fairy tale, but the kind where people vanish if they step off the path, she joked, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. I told her about Jamie, about the shadows by the bridge, and the way the villagers seemed to close ranks whenever the rules were mentioned. She leaned in, lowering her voice. Do you really believe all this? The candles, the bridge, the church bell? I mean, it's just superstition, right? I wanted to agree, to laugh it off, but the memory of Jamie's pale face and the silence that followed his absence made it hard. I don't know, I admitted, but everyone here acts like the rules are life and death. Maybe they know something we don't. Clara shook her head, a defiant smile tugging at her lips. I'm tempted to test one, just to prove it's all nonsense. Maybe we should cross the bridge after dark together, or ignore the candle thing next month. Her words were bold, but I could hear the uncertainty beneath them. The village had a way of getting under your skin, making you second-guess even the simplest things. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our doubts pressing in. Outside, the village moved on as always, orderly, quiet, and watchful. I realized then that skepticism was a kind of rebellion here, a dangerous one. As I left Clara's cottage, I glanced back at her window, half expecting to see a candle already burning against the coming night. The rules felt tighter than ever, and I wondered how long either of us could resist the urge to push against them. It was Clara who broke the next rule. She'd always been the braver of the two of us, or maybe just more stubborn. The incident happened on the first night of the new month, when every window in the village glowed with candlelight. I was at home, watching the flames flicker in my own window, when a sharp knock rattled my door. I opened it to find Clara, her face flushed with excitement and a hint of fear. I didn't light mine, she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. I want to see what happens. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just a story to keep us in line. I tried to reason with her, but she was already backing away, her eyes shining with a reckless kind of hope. Come over if you get scared, I said, but she only laughed and disappeared into the night. The village was unusually quiet that evening. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I sat by my window, watching Clara's cottage across the lane. Her window was dark, the only one without a candle. The hours dragged by, and I found myself growing restless, every creak and groan of the old house making me jump. Midnight came and went, and still, nothing happened. Then, just after 1, a sound shattered the silence, a shrill, inhuman wail that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I rushed to the door and flung it open. The village square was bathed in a sickly, unnatural light. Shadows twisted and writhed along the ground, moving with a life of their own. Clara's cottage stood at the center of it all, her dark window a gaping wound in the wall of flickering flames. Villagers emerged from their homes, drawn by the noise. Their faces were pale, eyes wide with terror. No one spoke. We watched as the shadows gathered around Clara's door, pressing against it, seeping through the cracks. The wailing grew louder, rising to a fever pitch. I saw Clara's silhouette in the window, her hands pressed against the glass, her mouth open in a silent scream. Suddenly, the door burst open, and the shadows surged inside. The light in the square flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. The wailing stopped. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the villagers began to drift back to their homes, their faces blank with shock. I stood frozen on my doorstep, staring at Clara's cottage, willing her to appear, to prove it had all been a nightmare. But she didn't. The next morning, I went to her cottage. The door hung open, swinging gently in the breeze. Inside, everything was as she'd left it, her mug on the table, a book open on the armchair, a half-finished letter on the desk. But Clara was gone. There was no sign of struggle, no trace of her at all. Only a faint, lingering chill in the air and the unmistakable scent of candle wax. The villagers avoided my eyes that day, their silence heavier than ever. No one mentioned Clara. No one asked where she'd gone. That night, every window in the village burned with candlelight, brighter than before, as if daring the darkness to return. I lit mine too, hands shaking, and sat awake until dawn, haunted by the memory of Clara's face in the window and the knowledge that the rules were not just stories, they were a matter of survival. In the days after Clara vanished, the village changed. People moved with a new urgency, locking doors before dusk and glancing over their shoulders even in broad daylight. Whispers filled the air, snatches of gossip, half-formed theories, and nervous prayers. I caught fragments as I passed. She should have known better. It's always the outsiders. The rules are all we have. No one spoke Clara's name directly, as if saying it might invite the same fate. I tried to ask Mrs. Hargrove what had happened, but she only shook her head, her eyes rimmed red with sleeplessness. "It's best not to dwell," she murmured, pressing a trembling hand to mine. "We must be careful now. The village is unsettled." Even Mr. Finch, usually so composed, seemed rattled. He doubled the patrols at night, and I saw him nailing fresh charms to the trees at the edge of the woods. Inside my cottage, the walls felt closer than ever. Every sound made me jump, the groan of the floorboards, the wind rattling the shutters, the distant toll of the church bell. I found myself checking the locks again and again, lighting my candle early, and watching the shadows crawl across the ceiling. The rules, once just oddities, now felt like iron bars. I followed them to the letter, terrified of what might happen if I slipped. Trust evaporated. Neighbors who once smiled now avoided my gaze. Children were kept indoors, and the market emptied before noon. I felt eyes on me wherever I went, as if the village itself was watching, waiting for me to falter. I missed Clara's laughter, her stubborn skepticism, the way she made the fears seem smaller. Without her, the silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. I began to wonder if I'd ever truly belonged here, or if I was just another outsider marked for punishment. The village was beautiful, but it was a beauty edged with menace, a place where safety came at the cost of freedom. Each night, as I lit my candle and locked my door, I wondered how much longer I could endure living by rules I barely understood, in a place that felt less like a home and more like a cage. The truth came to me in fragments, pieced together from whispered stories, old records, and the reluctant confessions of those who had lived in the village all their lives. It began with a visit to the library, a cramped room above the post office, where dust motes danced in the sunlight and the shelves sagged under the weight of forgotten histories. I was searching for anything that might explain the rules, anything that might make sense of the fear that gripped the village. It was Mrs. Hargrove who finally broke her silence. I found her one afternoon, sitting alone in the churchyard, her hands folded in her lap. She looked older than I'd ever seen her, her face drawn and tired. When I asked her, gently, about the rules, She sighed and motioned for me to sit beside her. "It started long before I was born," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "The village was smaller then, just a handful of families. They say the woods were different, darker, wilder, full of things that didn't belong in the daylight. People vanished, sometimes whole families, and no one could explain why. The elders tried everything, prayers, charms, even burning the fields, but nothing worked. The disappearances continued, always at night, always without warning." She paused, her gaze fixed on the tangled trees at the edge of the graveyard. "Then, one winter, a stranger arrived. He claimed to know how to keep the darkness at bay. He gave the villagers 6 rules, simple things, he said, but they must be followed without exception. Desperate, the villagers agreed. That was the first year no one vanished. The rules became law, passed down from parent to child, neighbor to neighbor. And for a time, the village was safe." I listened, heart pounding, as she described the price of safety. "The rules are a pact," she said. "A bargain struck with something old and hungry that lives in the woods. As long as we obey, it leaves us be. But if we falter, even once, it reminds us who holds the power. That's why the punishments are so swift, so final. It's not just superstition, it's survival." I thought of Jamie, of Clara, of the others who had disappeared. "What happens to them?" I asked, my voice shaking. Mrs. Hargrove's eyes filled with tears. "They're taken. Sometimes, if you listen at night, you can hear them calling from the woods. But no one who's gone has ever come back." The weight of her words settled over me like a shroud. I understood now why the village was so strict, why the rules were enforced with such fear. It wasn't about control or tradition. It was about keeping the darkness at bay, about protecting what little remained of their world. As I left the churchyard, I felt the eyes of the village on me, watching, judging, waiting to see if I would obey. The rules were no longer just lines on a page. They were the only thing standing between us and the thing that waited in the woods, patient and hungry, ready to claim anyone who dared to forget. The beauty of the village was a mask, a fragile shield against the ancient terror that pressed in from all sides. And now that I knew the truth, I wondered if I could ever feel safe again, or if I was already marked by the darkness that had claimed so many before me. It was nearly midnight when the pounding started. At first, I thought it was a dream, just the wind rattling the shutters, or my heart thudding in my chest. But the sound grew louder, more desperate, echoing through the empty lanes and into my bones. I sat up in bed, every muscle tense, listening as the knocks came again, this time accompanied by a voice, thin, terrified, and unmistakably human. "Please, let me in. Please, help me." I stumbled to the window and peered out into the darkness. The village was silent, every window dark but for the flicker of candlelight. At my door, a figure huddled in the shadows, pounding with both fists. It was Mrs. Hargrove. Her hair was wild, her nightgown torn, and her face streaked with tears. She looked up at me, eyes wide with terror. "They're coming," she gasped. I broke the rule. I went outside. I thought I heard my son's voice, but it wasn't him. "Please, let me in. Don't leave me out here." My mind raced. The first rule, never leave your home after midnight, no matter what you hear outside. I remembered Mrs. Hargrove's warnings, the stories of those who vanished, the pact with the thing in the woods. But this was different. This was a person I knew, someone who had shown me kindness, who had tried to protect me. I couldn't just leave her to whatever waited in the darkness. I hesitated, hand on the lock, torn between fear and compassion. The pounding grew frantic. Please. It's so close, I can hear it. Don't let it take me. I glanced at the clock. Midnight had come and gone. The rules were clear, but so was the terror in Mrs. Hargrove's voice. I pressed my forehead to the door, trying to think. If I opened it, I'd be breaking the rule. If I didn't, I'd be condemning her. The village was silent, as if holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do. A cold wind swept through the lane, carrying with it a low, guttural growl. Shadows shifted at the edge of the woods, coiling and uncoiling like living things. I saw movement, something tall and thin, with limbs too long and a face that was nothing but darkness. It crept closer, drawn by the sound of Mrs. Hargrove's cries. I made my choice. I threw the bolt and yanked open the door, grabbing Mrs. Hargrove by the arm and pulling her inside. The cold hit me like a slap, and for a moment, I thought I saw the thing in the darkness turn its head, eyeless and grinning. I slammed the door shut, locking it tight, and pressed my back against the wood, hard hammering. Mrs. Hargrove collapsed on the floor, sobbing. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." But the danger wasn't over. The thing outside began to circle the cottage, scraping its claws along the walls, whispering in a voice that sounded like every lost villager, every vanished child. The candle in my window flickered and nearly went out. I grabbed another and lit it, hands shaking, praying it would be enough. The hours crawled by. The thing prowled outside, testing the windows, rattling the shutters, whispering promises and threats. I held Mrs. Hargrove close, both of us too afraid to speak. I thought of Clara, of Jamie, of all the others who had vanished. I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake, if I'd doomed us both. But as dawn broke, the thing retreated, melting back into the woods. The village slowly came to life, doors opening, candles snuffed out. I helped Mrs. Hargrove to her feet, both of us exhausted but alive. We had broken the rule, but we had survived. The cost, I knew, would come later. The village would not forget. The thing in the woods would not forgive. But for one night, compassion had triumphed over fear, and I had chosen to save a life, even if it meant risking my own. Morning arrived gray and cold, the village shrouded in a heavy silence. I barely slept, every muscle aching from tension, every thought circling back to the night's terror. Mrs. Hargrove sat at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea she barely touched. Her eyes were hollow, her voice a whisper. "You shouldn't have opened the door," she said, not with anger, but with a sorrow that seemed to age her by years. "But I'm grateful you did." Outside, the village moved with a strange, uneasy purpose. Neighbors glanced at my cottage and quickly looked away. Mr. Finch arrived before noon, his face set in grim lines. He didn't scold or threaten, only left a new list of rules on my doorstep, handwritten, the ink still wet, as if to remind me that the pact was not broken, only tested. The message was clear. The rules would be enforced even more strictly now, and any mercy shown would be remembered by the darkness in the woods. Mrs. Hargrove left quietly, returning to her own home, her steps slow and uncertain. I watched her go, feeling the weight of what we'd done pressing down on me. I had saved her, but I knew the village would never truly forgive the breach. The sense of community I'd once felt was gone, replaced by suspicion and fear. Doors closed a little earlier, candles burned a little brighter, and the silence after sunset was absolute. I survived, but I was changed. The rules were no longer just words on a page. They were a living boundary, a line I had crossed and could never uncross. The village's cycle continued, the horror lingering in every shadow, every whispered warning. I understood now that survival here was not just about obedience, but about sacrifice, of trust, of comfort, of the hope that things might ever be normal again. As night fell, I lit my candle and locked my door, the memory of claws on wood and voices in the dark echoing in my mind. The rules would keep us safe, for now, but I knew, deep down, that the cost would always be waiting just beyond the edge of the woods. Weeks passed, and the village settled into its old routines, but nothing truly returned to normal. I became a shadow among shadows, moving quietly through the lanes, exchanging only the briefest of greetings. The villagers' eyes slid past me, wary and distant, as if I carried a mark they could all see. I kept to myself, following the rules with a devotion that bordered on obsession. Each night, I lit my candle, checked the locks, and listened to the wind for any hint of voices that didn't belong. Sometimes, I caught glimpses of Mrs. Hargrove at her window, her face pale in the candlelight. We never spoke of that night again. The bond we'd forged in terror was a silent one, a secret we both carried. I wondered if she, too, felt the weight of the village's judgment, or if she had simply learned to bear it better than I had. The rules became my world. I recited them in my mind like a prayer, each line a ward against the darkness pressing in from the woods. I understood now why the villagers clung to them so fiercely. The rules were the only thing standing between us and the thing that waited, patient and hungry, just beyond the reach of the candlelight. One evening, as I was returning from the market, I saw a car parked by the old stone bridge, a battered sedan with out-of-town plates. A young woman stood beside it, suitcase in hand, her eyes wide with wonder as she took in the village's quaint charm. I watched as Mrs. Hargrove approached her, offering a smile and a handshake, just as she had with me. The newcomer's laughter rang out, bright and unburdened, and for a moment, I envied her innocence. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by my window, watching the newcomer's cottage. The lights glowed late into the evening, and I imagined her unpacking, dreaming of a fresh start, unaware of the rules that would soon govern her every move. I wanted to warn her, to tell her the truth before it was too late, but I knew it wouldn't matter. Everyone arrives in Willow's and thinking the rules are just stories, until the stories come for them. As midnight approached, a chill crept through the cottage. The candle in my window flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. I heard footsteps outside, soft, hesitant, unfamiliar. I held my breath, listening as they paused at my gate, then moved on toward the newcomer's door. A knock echoed through the night, sharp and urgent. I pressed my face to the glass, heart pounding, but saw only darkness beyond the glow of the street lamp. The next morning, the newcomer's window was dark. No candle burned behind the glass. The village was silent, the air heavy with expectation. I understood, then, that the cycle would never end. There would always be someone new, someone curious, someone who thought the rules didn't apply. And the thing in the woods would always be waiting, patient as ever. I turned away from the window, the rules echoing in my mind. Never leave your home after midnight. Never answer the church bell at dawn. Never cross the stone bridge after sunset. Never meet a stranger's eyes. Always light a candle. Never enter the woods alone. And above all, never, ever forget, the rules are never to be broken, or else